Hey everybody, Mrs. Bianchi here. We're looking at number 7, and I'm having a problem with the Screencastify software. I don't know why it's doing this, but it's making like shadow effect of the cursor. So I apologize if you see like blinking pencils on your screen because I'm not seeing that right now while I'm recording, and I'm hoping that doesn't show up. But at any rate, number 7 says Bart drove 140 miles in 2.5 hours. What was Bart's average speed in miles per hour? So let's use a ratio and a proportion to solve this. All right, so let's write, we're talking about miles and we're talking about hours. So let's write miles over here and hours over here. And we'll take what I have right here. We're going to make this into a ratio. Now this is 140 miles, and we have two options here. We can either rethink this as 2 5/10 and substitute that in, or what might be easier is to turn this into an improper fraction. And as an improper fraction, you'd say to yourself, well, that's something halves. And how do I get the numerator? You multiply 2 times 2, which is 4, and add in the 1, which would be 5. So it's equal to 5 halves. Now I'm going to put that in right here, and it'll make more sense why sometimes it's easier to use fractions. All right, now if we look at the next part of this question, it says, what was Bart's average speed in miles per hour? So that means we want to know how many miles are we going in 1 hour. This means you would read this ratio as miles per 1 hour. All right, so now let's look at our cross products. One of the cross products is right here. 140 times 1, that would equal 140. What's the other cross product? It would be going this way. 5 halves times m. 5 halves times m. All right, now when we get to this point, we already studied in class how to solve these types of equations. The opposite of multiplying a variable by 5 halves is to divide it by 5 halves. And dividing by 5 halves is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of this, which would be 2/5. So we're going to put that on both sides of the equation. Now keep in mind that some of you that like decimals, if you, instead of using this 5 halves, if you wanted to replace it with the 2 5/10, that would be okay as well. All right, but let's proceed with what we have going on here. So anytime you multiply a value by its reciprocal, it equals 1, and 1 times m would equal m. But if you didn't notice that, see 5 goes into both of those, 2 and 2, 2 goes into this, 2 goes into this, right? And 1 times 1 would be 1, 1 times m is m. All right, but over here, we can simplify the 5 and the 140. Now, let's say you're like, I don't know how many times 5 goes into 140. You should know that it goes in because it ends in a 0. Any value that ends in a 0 or 5, we know that 5 goes into it. So if you don't know what the other value is, then you would just proceed with doing 140 divided by 5, because 5 is going to go into this once, and we're trying to figure out how many times it goes into 140. So it won't go into 1. It will go into 14 twice, which would be 10. Subtract, we get the 4 left over. Bring down the 0. 5 goes into 48 times. All right, so we divided by 5, got 1. We divided by 5, and here we get the 28. All right, so to get the answer, we just have to multiply 2 times 28. So let's do that down here. We'll get it started. So here we get the 16, and you're just going to finish up by doing 2 times 2, and then adding in the 1. Now, whatever you get, that's going to be the number that's going to go right here. And remember, the cross products have to match. This cross product going down is going to be equal to 140. This cross product going this way, if you multiply your answer with 5 halves, you should also get 140. All right, good luck finishing that up. And I just want to remind you that if this idea of 5 halves is too confusing, you can replace it with the 2 5/10, which it's its equivalent. And then right here, instead of this, you would have 2 5/10 times m, and you would be dividing 140 by 2 5/10. So that's another approach that you can follow on this particular question.